10 years are up. If you look at what wage growth is versus housing rent growth, they're projected of 150,000 homeless people by the end of the 10th year. So building 10,000 units is good, but insufficient. The United States has a $3.4 billion infrastructure deficit. That means that our roads, bridges, airports, water systems, sewer systems, school systems, energy systems, just for deferred maintenance, just to get up to good standard, need 3.4 billion. This has nothing, this doesn't even add the imagination of the new systems that we need. I'll tell you a little bit about the new systems that we need. So, Donald Trump ran on a proposal to create $1 trillion infrastructure fund, which, by the way, he's reneging on, and he's going to play games with, and it'll just be tax credits, and it really won't be. But even if it was $1 trillion, it's only a third of the problem to fix, less than a third of what we need to fix what we have, not even to imagine something new. So what I'm seeing is that we are approaching our, think about climate change too. There are very few cities that really have a plan for how do you really deal with the issues of climate change. For example, Miami. Miami is built on on a rock that's porous. And so even if you build a seawall, as the sea level rises, it comes up from under the city and into the city. So that's a real problem, because you actually have to, actually put like concrete or something across the whole city, raise the whole city up, like who knows even how far, 10 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet, raise all the utilities. There's no plan for that. So the issues that we are facing, and before I say there's no plan, so it starts with lack of vision. We actually are afraid as a society to dream big enough and to have a vision that matches the challenges ahead of us. So one of the things I encourage you all to become is dreamers, to become visionaries. That planning in America has become a very practical, methodical, process-oriented, kind of how you move zoning applications through the system, and they're not about imagination. We need you, we need all of us to really, so there's a program now, Imagine Boston 2030. It's pretty good, but it's, even to me, when I look through it, I don't, like it says, I think we're gonna create 80,000 units of affordable housing. It doesn't actually say how many units of affordable housing are needed. We need to actually have the courage to frame our issues, to understand how big they are, and then to have the imagination to design, to plan, to think about what does it take to get to them. I mentioned infrastructure. So one of the interesting issues we have in upper New York State is that it's in dramatic economic decline. Places like Springfield are not doing, Massachusetts are not doing very well. Imagine, by the way, this is something the Chinese would do, that if you connected Boston, Springfield, Albany, Ithaca, Rochester, Syracuse, Rochester, Montreal, Toronto, New Haven, New York City, all together into what's called an interaction sphere. They're connected by high-speed rail, so all those university towns were only an hour or two apart from each other, and maybe 3 or 4 hours to get across the whole thing. And you could unleash that economic capital, the stranded assets of all those amazing people who used to run Kodak and IBM in Rochester. But Syracuse has some of the, by the way, has what's considered the top 3 architecture department in America, and number 2 or 3 forestry and environment department in America. You could take all these assets and tie them together and create a much, by the way, get people out of cars. It'd be, I don't know if you've ever ridden on high-speed trains. It's a great pleasure. But we're not imagining these kinds of infrastructure systems, and we don't have the courage to actually get them built. Like in California, there's a high-speed rail system that's being planned that is being stopped by farmers who say, even though they're planning like underpassways for their tractors to go through, they say, well, I don't have to drive around the corner to get under one. I want to go wherever I want to go. And they're threatening to hold up the whole progress of the state because they don't like the proposed tractor pathways. So we need to have extraordinary vision. We need to have the courage to actually carry these visions out. We need to be planning and these are going to require huge new investments. We also have developed this thing that we don't like debt, we don't like deficits. We need to actually rethink what our budgets are. So for example, most cities and states have what's called a capital budget and an operating budget. What we really need to say as a nation is we must balance our operating budget. So our income of taxes needs to pay for all our expenses. But on the infrastructure side, we should borrow, we can borrow. When we build things like the fantastic dams that, like the Hoover Dam, et cetera, that powered the West, we can borrow today at at less than a 3% interest rate for 30 years. When you borrow that, you're creating infrastructure that generates economic value of 8-9% a year, that can easily pay for the debt. So we need to, the question is, where does the money, if you have a big vision and you have a plan for where you want to carry out, then where's the money come from it? The money is there, it's available in the debt markets. We have to have the courage to actually say there can be good debt for responsible infrastructure borrowing, and then there's places where we should not be borrowing, which is to cover our operating expenses, and those should be balanced against income. Okay, so we need a vision, we need methodologies, we need plans, we need methodologies. The other thing is that we used to make 20-year plans. That no longer works. We have to move into what I call dynamic planning. And again, cities are the place where it's much more viable to do this. With big data, we now have this incredible range of resources, of information that's coming in from traffic departments and hospitals and schools and health and education, and our cell phones are transmitting all kinds of information. And every time you do any email or anything on the internet, they're watching you and they're taking all this data you don't think they're taking, and all that data is available. And so we can be understanding the true conditions of society. So if we say, for example, we want to create an education system for the 21st century, we really want to change how people are educated and know that it's matching with the future of jobs. We can now begin to track how effective is that or is not. We can track everything. We can say if we want to be reducing climate change gases. So for example, one of the things we know is that cars are a big contributor. That when we create higher density cities that are more mixed use and more mixed income, where people can walk in more places or take mass transit more, that those cities get people out of cars more. So for example, people in New York City drive many fewer miles than people in other cities because of the higher density. So we know there's actually a direct correlation between density and climate change. I'm throwing a lot of ideas out, but my point is you can take them all, you can measure them, and you can see whether you're getting you closer to your plan, your vision, your goals, or not in real time, and then you can continually adjust. So we can move from static planning to dynamic planning. And that's something, which is what nature does. Nature is always co-evolving, it's always adjusting. Okay, so what do we want to adjust towards? So to me, there are two overarching principles that we need to achieve, not only in our cities, but I believe in our nations and actually as human civilization. The first is that humans are out of balance with nature, and we have to rebalance ourselves with nature. This is actually a core principle of the very earliest cities, of the very beginnings of civilization. That in China, for example, this idea of harmony between humans and nature was absolutely essential. And if you look at when dynasties changed, when basically dynasties got kicked out, it was typically when there was an earthquake or there was some environmental disruption in which people said, you know what, Emperor, you're not doing the job of keeping humans and nature in balance. And we today are not doing the job of keeping humans and nature in balance. We know far more how to do that. We know how to build much greener buildings. We know how to create much cleaner energy. We know how to, we know the enormous value, by the way, of bringing nature back into city, of planting trees, building parks and gardens, restoring our rivers, etc. We know how to do all of this. But we really need to set as a societal objective that we are going to rebalance humans and nature, because if we don't, we will have ecological collapse, we'll have biodiversity collapse, and that is going to lead to systems collapse. Climate change is being caused by humans today, but throughout history there has been naturally occurring climate change. And what we have seen is that whenever you have population growth, increased prosperity, so people are consuming more and more and more, they tend to grow their cities to the very edge of their capacity. So for example, the Mayan culture in the 6, 7, 800s AD grew and grew and grew, and they overconsumed for a variety of reasons their forests, and they had reservoirs that began to silt in because they cut the trees down off the slopes of the hills and basically reduced their water supply. When naturally occurring climate change came, and there was a 20-year drought, the civilization collapsed. And it collapsed, we can tell, in flames. So there was social disruption because the poor people burnt the city down. And they burnt it down because there was inequality. Whenever there's this combination of overconsumption, rapid growth, overpopulation, and inequality, you see violence in the end of the city. When there's a sense of peace and quality and people feel like they're treated fairly, you just get slow dispersion. So income inequality is another very important issue that's on the table today. Anyway, to go back to where I was saying is, so these two pieces. So number one, Ramiro said, number one is we have to balance of humans and nature. What we've seen is whenever population grows, all the conditions we have today, we're not in balance with humans and nature, we get collapse. I don't want collapse. I want thriving. Number two, this issue of income inequality and inequality in general. We live in a vast landscape of inequality. In 1950, if you lived in the bottom quartile, if you lived in America and you were in the bottom quartile of income, there was a 76% chance that by the time you were 26 years old, you would be earning more than your parents. Today, if you're in the bottom quartile of income, by the time you're 26, there's a 32% chance you'll be earning better than your parents. So we've gone from it's more than 50% chance to less than 50% chance. So the opportunity index, in effect, of America has been cut in half. And not only that, it is far more poorly distributed. If you look at maps of opportunity, there are counties in which if you grow up in those counties, you're very likely to do well. There are counties in which if you grow up, you're very likely to do poorly. There are neighborhoods in which if you live in the best zip code, you will statistically live 20 years longer than if you live in the worst zip code. There are neighborhoods in which your educational, your income outcomes, etc., vastly, vastly different. So, principle number one is balancing humans and nature. Principle number two for me is equalizing the landscape of opportunity. I believe we have a moral mission to say that certainly for America, I believe for the world, but certainly for America, to say that no matter what zip code, neighborhood, what address you live in, that every child should have an equal opportunity to receive the same quality of education, the same quality of healthcare, all the things necessary to thrive in their lives. And by the way, the same, it's not just for children, it's for adults, it's for families, and it's for seniors.